Great, thank you very much. So I'm Stirling Bryan. I'm the president of the BC Academic Health Science Network. And I'm actually at my workplace, despite the background might suggest otherwise, but I would like to acknowledge that my workplace is within the ancestral, traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So I'm delighted to chair this session, and this is a session that's going to be on support platforms and platforms that are designed to support high quality health research on COVID-19. The session is going to be describing the platforms that form part of the provincial research response to COVID. And the idea is that this session complements yesterday's opening session that Bev Holmes chaired, that described the key elements of the provincial response to COVID-19. So we have 5 speakers in this session. Terri Fleming, who is the Director of Research Ethics BC, which is one of the component parts of AHSN. Stefanie Cheah, who's the Project Manager for the REACH BC platform. Lindsay Hedden, who's the Assistant Scientific Director at BC AHSN and also faculty at Simon Fraser University. Kim McGrail, who is the Scientific Director of Pop Data BC and a Professor at the School of Population and Public Health at UBC. And Harlan Pruden, who we've met and discussed. So he'll be discussing his work, and he's a First Nations Cree scholar and an educator at BCCDC. So each talk is going to have 10 minutes of presentation, and I've indicated that I will be cutting people off after 10 minutes, so we're going to try and keep to the time. And given that the talks are on quite different topics, we're going to allow 1 or 2 questions to happen after each session. And then we will allow, then hopefully have some time for more general question and answer at the end of the session. And we'll be going through until 10:30 this morning. So just to say, BC AHSN has 3 operating units: the Research Ethics BC, as I've mentioned, Clinical Trials BC, and also the BC Support Unit. And the latter is seeking to ensure that we listen effectively in health research to the voices of those with lived experience, patients, and the public. And so what I would like to do in this session is particularly encourage questions from those with lived experience, patients, and the public. So what I'm going to ask is, if you are asking a question and your question comes from a lived experience perspective, either from a patient or public perspective, then if you put patient or public as the first word in the question, that'll help me to identify those questions, and I'll give prominence to those questions. So please, that's what I'm encouraging in this session, is that we actually listen more effectively to the voices of patients and public on these topics. So that's my suggestion. So we're going to go through each, as I've said, we'll go through each speaker in turn. We will have 1 or 2 questions after each speaker, and then we'll have some general Q&A at the end. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn over to our first speaker, who is Terri Fleming. So I'm hoping that Terri is able to share her screen so that we can see her slides. So I would ask Terri to do that now, if you could. And we're a go. Great. So I'll hand over to Terri, who is the Director of Research Ethics BC. So over to you, Terri.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Stirling, and the other organizers for asking me to be here today. I'm going to be providing some information on the rapid research ethics review process that was created for clinical COVID-19 studies. As this diagram shows, we have a large network of research ethics boards in the province that work with us at Research Ethics BC. We were originally formed as an initiative to find a harmonized or single review process for multi-jurisdictional studies. Since the harmonized processes were established in 2015, our network has grown to include 19 research ethics boards across the province. It has become It was because of the relationships that we formed within this network that we were able to begin the population of the BC COVID-19 inventory of research that Lindsay will tell you a little bit about later. Very soon after the declaration of the public health emergency in BC, we started to hear from researchers, the ministry, Health Canada, funding agencies, and various other stakeholders that there was a need to quickly obtain ethical approval for studies so as not to delay the start of vital research. Clinical research, such as that being submitted to investigate the SARS-CoV-2 virus, develop new treatment options, and vaccine development, all require review by a clinical research ethics board. The institutions listed here were involved in the development and agreement of the rapid review process, as they would be the most affected institutions. The rapid review process expanded on the harmonized review already used by the clinical research ethics boards. One research ethics board, the board of record, conducts the review, and it is accepted by the other research ethics boards. This review takes place within 5 days of the receipt of the application. Research Ethics Board members were prepared to have meetings on very short notice and fully engage in a swift but thorough research ethics review. Health authority research ethics boards agreed to provide only local institutional comments within 24 hours. This is because even in this time of need, it was vital to ensure the autonomy of the research ethics boards, as this was at the very core of the harmonized review models agreed to this date. Once reviewed, the researcher receives a single document that includes input from all health authorities where the study could be conducted. When the researcher responds to the review and all provisos are considered satisfactory to the Research Ethics Board, they will receive a certificate of ethical approval for all regional health authorities. The other key element is the agreement to one privacy consultation, if required. And the process should eliminate the possibility of duplicate privacy reviews by health authorities as part of the ethical review process. Some interpretations by institutions of the BC privacy legislation overlaps with the review already conducted by research ethics under the Tri-Council Policy Statement, Ethical Conduct of Research Involving Humans, or TCPS2 for short. The research ethics boards will not always have a privacy specialist embedded in the review process, but when they do, it should eliminate the need for a separate review. We all agreed that it was necessary to reduce duplication, and so one privacy consult would suffice for a study. 2 weeks later, we expanded the model that you see that I've described here to allow for a provincial level ethical review for incoming clinical trials that are intended to be provincial in scope. The results of putting this process in place are going to be more fully reviewed by the clinical research ethics community, but some early numbers are that the rapid review process was applied to 74 multi-jurisdictional studies on COVID-19. But this represents only a small number of the over 254 COVID-19 research studies that have received ethical review since March, both as single institutional studies and multi-jurisdictional studies. We know that there are more that have not yet been included in the inventory and are collecting more information weekly. So what did we learn? I have heard the term unintended consequences a lot over the last few weeks, and we have identified a couple as well for our rapid review process. While it was well and good that our research ethics community agreed to a rapid review and single privacy consult for COVID-19 clinical studies, this did not allow enough time for the other institutional-based review or approval processes to fully engage. During a normal ethics review process, there may be a couple of weeks between the time the study is received and the research ethics review or meeting which is held, which allows for the other institutions usually involved to, like the health authorities, to notify the operational reviewers within their institutions. Their review processes can include things like information privacy and security consultation, legal, contracts, data management, clinical leadership, etc. And normally this would launch a concurrent process. As we saw with a couple of very important studies in the province, differences in interpretation of privacy legislation and how it is applied, as well as legal contracts, cause delays in the launch of studies in some institutions. In my opinion, this is unacceptable in the best of times. But I think that the quote, "It will never be perfect, make it work," applies here, and we have an obligation to resolve the problem of multiple separate review processes for research studies once and for all. I'm happy to say that I'm working with some colleagues on some recommendations to this end, and they will be shared very soon. And that concludes my presentation. And I think I'm under 10 minutes. So I'm happy to take a couple questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Terri. So please feel free to send me a private question if you would wish to do that, rather than sharing it openly on the chat, or share it openly on the chat. So please do that. I'm going to just say a huge thank you to Terri, her colleagues at Research Ethics BC, and her colleagues who work in research ethics across the province for getting us to this point. I think it's just a remarkable step forward for us to, as a province, have a single research ethics process that we've got for COVID. So I guess, like, as a starting point, I'll kick off the questions. I don't see any at the moment in the chat. The legacy for non-COVID research in BC, is it too early to hope that we might move in this direction for non-COVID research, Terri?
There's a couple of aspects to that. I think part of it would be the rapid part of the review. So the rapid part of having the review conducted within 5 working days, really difficult to commit to that for a legacy when you don't have the prioritization of certain types of research, as we did with COVID-19. All other research kind of stopped, and so COVID-19 was the priority. So there was that ability to do that within 5 working days. But when you're talking about, across the province, hundreds of new research studies every year, I think it might be a bit tough without more resources to commit to that 5-day rapid review. But with regards to the other aspects, and in particular, I think this would pertain to harmonization of other operational processes. I'm really hoping that we can drive that forward, that we've seen through this model that although it worked for research ethics, it opened up that gap and showed us very clearly the problem that we've all known for over 10 years was an existing problem and that we've needed to kind of tackle. And this is the time, this is the opportunity we have to do that.
And with you at the helm, I'm confident that we're going to make progress. Thank you, Terri. So we have a question that has patient. So just as a reminder, if you put patient or public at the beginning of your question, then I'll give it priority in this session. So thank you, Terri. This is a question from Lisa Ridgway. I love the "make it work" mantra. Can you tell us how patient partners were involved in research ethics boards and reviews during COVID-19?
So I wouldn't be able to speak on behalf of every board at this time. I know that every research ethics board has an obligation to have community members involved in the research ethics board. That is described in Tri-Council policy statement, and it's absolutely necessary. I also know that some boards specifically have patient partners as in a specific role on their research ethics board, but I wouldn't be able to speak to how they were involved in each of the individual research studies. I'm sorry, I can't provide that information, Lisa.
So I think that's something that we'll explore and get back to Lisa on. So we've got one other question, which I think we'll have as a final question, and then we'll move on to Stefanie. So this is a question that's how do we hold people accountable for decisions that unnecessarily delay rapid response research? Thank you, Terri.
That's a tough one, but I think that part of what we're trying to do with the recommendations that we're coming up with on our small but mighty working group is we're trying to aim the briefing that we're providing about possible and the recommendations we're providing at the right level. And so we're trying to aim this at the decision makers in the organizations to profile for them what is going on and what the issue is and how it could be resolved, and that they are, as decision makers, have that ability to do that. So I think that is one way that we're trying to hold them accountable is aiming this messaging at the decision makers at the highest level.
Great. Thank you very much, Terri. I just want to, again, just reiterate the thanks from us as a research community in the province for the work that you're doing to move research ethics forward in BC. Thank you very much. So we'll move to our next presentation. So this is going to be a presentation on the the Reach BC platform that Stefanie Cheah is going to present. Stefanie is the project manager for the Reach BC platform and has been working on this now for some time, and we're at the point where Reach is now launched. So it's a great opportunity for others to learn more about the platform. So over to you, Stefanie.
Thank you, Stirling. And thank you everyone for this opportunity to share about Reach BC. I'm really excited, especially for those who may not have heard about Reach BC yet. It's a platform that's been developed and just recently launched. Took several years. It was developed as a demonstration project at the BC Support Unit with Dr. Robert McMaster from Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute leading it as principal investigator. So let's see if this works. Go to the next slide. What is Reach BC? It's a new online platform that connects British Columbians to health research opportunities that are either related to the health conditions that they have or what they're interested in. And as I mentioned, it was a demonstration project at the support unit. Over several years, it was developed with a provincial working group, and that included individuals from the health authorities, research institutes, universities, as well as patient partners sat on this provincial working group to help develop what Reach BC has become. We also conducted several stakeholder engagement sessions with different community groups across the province. So there were about, I think we had 5 consultations where we really were gathering requirements into what was needed to go into this platform. So I like to share this picture that I took at the BC Children's Hospital. This is a bulletin board in the hospital. I'm not sure if it's still up, but it was up a few years ago. It's a participate in our research board where researchers will post their studies that are looking for participants, and they're hoping that a patient or member of the public walks by and sees their poster and identifies themselves as like, oh, this might be interesting to me, and then they take the phone number. So this kind of represents what Reach BC was aiming to help support, both for researchers who are trying to find participants for their studies, but also for patients or members of the public who are interested in research, but they might not be at that hospital at that time when that poster is posted. So we've taken this idea and brought it online into Reach BC. So what Reach BC has is a provincial-wide directory of research projects that are actively looking for people to participate in their project. This is a publicly searchable directory. But not only in this directory, not only are there research studies like clinical trials, behavioral research studies, we also have patient partner research opportunities. So for any researchers who are conducting patient-oriented research and looking for patient partners, we also share those through Reach BC. And one of the key things that Reach BC is about is we created this software, or what we like to call like a matching engine, where we will automatically match people to those projects that might meet their interests. So when you come to Reach BC as a member of the public, you can sign up and you create a profile for yourself. And then we'll match you based on that profile to projects based on your age, sex, gender, where you're located, and the health research categories that you've selected. So really we're giving it to the public, or a volunteer's choice, really. You'll get matched to all the projects that are available in the directory, and then you can review and choose which projects are interesting to you. And by clicking a button that says, I'm interested in this project, I want the researcher to contact me, we connect you to the research team. So it's each project you're giving basically permission for that researcher to contact you. So the Reach BC platform, we developed it with a lot of subject matter experts. Privacy was consulted. We take users' privacy very seriously, and we built it so that it's protected and secure. And so people can feel safe about the information that they're providing in Reach BC. We've also worked to be collaborative with a lot of organizations that overlap with what ReachBC does. So we've worked with the BC Support Unit, Clinical Trials BC, Research Ethics BC, all to ensure that what we've developed with ReachBC, our processes are streamlined with any existing processes out there for the research community. And right now, during the COVID-19 time, we've also worked with the BC Centre for Disease Control, as well as the COVID-19 Clinical Research Coordination Initiative to ensure that we're working with those COVID-19 processes. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to tell you about how ReachBC is supporting COVID-19 research. When we launched in April, it was a little bit earlier than what our original timeline was for ReachBC, but we realized it was an opportunity really to make ReachBC available to the public and researchers in order to hopefully expedite COVID-19 research. So right now we have a process with the Centre for Disease Control, CDC, where we're contacting all COVID diagnosed patients who survived. And that process involves the CDC sending an introductory letter to those patients and a follow-up phone call where the patient is asked, are you willing to be contacted about research into COVID-19? Yes or no? And then if they say yes, ReachBC will help send out an email with an activation link to create their ReachBC volunteer account. Once they're a ReachBC volunteer, as I mentioned, like the whole process is automatic. They get matched to the research projects. If they're interested, they get connected to the research team. And here's some early numbers from that COVID-19 process. This is a couple weeks old, so I don't have the most up-to-date numbers at this time yet, but about 1,800 patients were on that list to be contacted by the CDC. And of that 1,800, 801 were contacted so far. And then 609 of them said yes to be contacted about research. So about 76% said yes to be contacted about research. That's really great to know that these patients are interested in research. And that actually matches what a public opinion poll about the BC population determined that about 70% of people are interested in participating in research. So of those who said yes, 561 of them have email addresses. And that's important for us as ReachBC because that's required in order to join ReachBC. We do know, of course, that now there's some people who are interested in research who don't have email and it may not join ReachBC because of that, or they're not comfortable joining ReachBC as an online platform. So we're happy to say that ReachBC is also involved in coordinating how those patients will be contacted about research, and they will hear about research as well. So we're trying to include everybody. So lastly, how researchers can recruit COVID patients for their projects. They can do it easily through ReachBC. First, you create a ReachBC researcher account, and that's for a principal investigator must do that, the PI, or as well as a study team member, like a research coordinator can do that. You submit your research study or patient partner research opportunity, which will be reviewed by the ReachBC office. And then you can connect with volunteers that match your project and who are interested in being contacted. So I hope that those of you who did not know about ReachBC see this as a great tool that you can use. Either if you're patient or member of the public interested in research, you can go to ReachBC search our directory, see what's out there. Or if you're a researcher looking for participants, we're hoping that this will help your recruitment processes and be more efficient for you. I'd like to acknowledge all the input that went into the development of ReachBC, especially from the patient partners who were on our working group. And we had a patient advisory group as well for the testing of our site, the Research Institutes, health authorities, as well as all the organizations here and our funders and partners who were involved in launching ReachBC. And that's the end. I just want to say thank you again to all those who provided input into this. A lot of the people I think are on the call, on the conference today. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you very much, Steph. And I just wanted, I know it's not been an easy road to get to this point, but I think we have something very special in ReachBC for the province. And I think it's a work in progress, and I don't think that, I mean, I'm sure that people, I mean, I've seen some very, very positive messages in the chat about its functionality, and the idea, I'm sure, is for it to improve as we go. But I would want us to all embrace Reach BC and to be using Reach BC as we move forward, so that it can be the go-to platform for us to connect patients and patient partners to research opportunities, and really just to enhance the quality of research that can happen and the efficiency of research in BC. So I think that's fabulous. So thank you very much for all of the work you've done on this. So just as a reminder, if you want to me to prioritize your question, and you are a patient or a member of the public, then just start the question with the word patient or public, and I'll do that. So a couple of questions have come in. So one question is about awareness amongst the public, and how are you, or how are we ensuring that everyone is aware of this and has the opportunity to respond and to sign up for Reach?
Yes, I actually forgot to mention that in the presentation. So when we launched in April, the main focus was to build up our Reach BC directory of projects. So the main focus of announcing Reach BC was for the research community to really populate the projects onto the directory. So now that we've had a few months and we have about 26 projects on there, 11 of them are COVID related. We're going to be this fall looking at some marketing activities, which it will include some advertising like social media campaigns and those types of things to really get the word out there. Another, I didn't get to talk to her yesterday, but another thing is really getting the Ministry of Health to support Reach BC and really promote it through, maybe a public update, or have Dr. Henry mention it would be our ideal goal. I'll be presenting at several conferences and meetings over the fall, and the support unit conference being one where we'll do a public kind of launch of Reach BC. So there's a number of activities we're planning.
And I think the general, sort of just the promotion of this platform to the public, I think is going to be really, really important. So I think those who wish or can help and support that, then I guess they should be connecting with you directly.
Yes.
Because I think we do need to make sure that people know about this and know about it quickly. But also the research community. We need the research community to respond and to place opportunities on Reach, to use Reach. Because it only is going to be successful.
That will drive people to come to Reach, for sure.
So we had a question. Peter wants to know about, Peter Berman wants to know about Reach in terms of social and behavioral research. So is this a platform that can facilitate
behavioral research? Yeah, there's a number of behavioral research projects that were approved by the BREV, the Behavioral Research Ethics Board, on Reach BC right now, a lot from the population health faculty. So these are surveys, online surveys that they're looking for participants to take the surveys, and some of them are related to COVID-19, some are related to other things like stress and mental health. So those are available.
Great, thanks very much. So does Reach BC have any social media we can share? I think the answer is yes.
Well, we could use the hashtag Reach BC. And we have our partner organization, Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute, has been sharing and posting, and I think that's getting reshared by a lot of other partner organizations. I don't have an account myself for Reach BC. That's actually taken the Twitter name. So we had to, and we don't have the bandwidth to manage a social media channel at this time, but we'll use the hashtag Reach BC, and hopefully as our partners share posts, that can be reshared across the channels.
I think we need to find a solution to your lack of bandwidth on the social media front at this point. So, and Victoria has suggested, in fact, that we promote Reach BC, that everyone who's part of the symposium should be sharing the information about Reach BC, so that
would be amazing and great.
Yeah, and it is going to be part of the support unit's annual conference this year, Putting Patients First, which is on October the 8th, and registration is now open. As an aside, if you wish to register for that conference. Good. I think we'll close at that point. So we'll come back if anyone has any further questions relating to REACH. We'll have that in the open Q&A later on. But again, a huge thank you for everything you're doing to get us to this point, Stefanie, and the team. I think it's a special resource for the province and something that really should give us a strong advantage. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on now to our third presentation, and Lindsay Hedden is going to be presenting, and she's going to be sharing information around the research, the BC inventory of COVID-19 research. Lindsay, as I said, is the Assistant Scientific Director at BCHSN and also faculty in the Faculty of Health Sciences at SFU. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Sterling. So I would like to start by sending a huge shout out to the fantastic team of staff that have been instrumental in putting this research inventory together. It has been an absolutely huge amount of trying work that was done off the side of several people's desks. So I would be entirely remiss by not acknowledging that right off the bat. So we've heard over the course of this conference that there really has been a rapid proliferation of research efforts focused around COVID-19, which is great, but it does lead to potential for duplicative work. There have been formal research registries developed, particularly in the areas of clinical trials, in order to reduce things like publication and reporting bias, to reduce unnecessary duplication, and to improve transparency. But these tend to be really narrowly focused on clinical trials, and we're not aware of any other resources that are more broadly focused for things like behavioral research, for example. Victoria Shuckle, in her comments yesterday, actually referred to the importance of coordination specifically in this area, just because of the sheer amount of work that's happening and a need to be strategic in terms of funding things that are not already funded. So collaboration is needed among both researchers and funders so that we're minimizing duplication of work and maximizing the number of projects that we can fund. So we had two linked objectives when we started work on this registry. The first was to create and maintain a living and public database of research projects that have some relation with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second was to facilitate and support linkage between individuals and groups that are doing similar or related work, either from a content perspective or from a methodological perspective. So this work started primarily as an internal partnership with Research Ethics BC, and the big sort of dump of initial data that we were able to put into the database actually came from submissions to various ethics boards. The limitation to this approach is that we were really only able to catch projects that had progressed far enough that they were seeking ethics approval or that required ethics in the first place. So the second step we took was to pull information from funders of research that had been posted publicly, like the Michael Smith Foundation and CIHR, and enter information that way. Following that, we undertook a substantial outreach campaign where we've asked researchers to connect with us about projects that they're involved in, that are ongoing, but maybe hadn't reached the point where they were receiving ethics approval yet, or where they hadn't achieved funding. And so we've been filling in forms or having researchers enter the form manually to make sure that the database is as comprehensive as possible. And what you should see on the screen now is a screenshot of what the inventory looks like. And you can see the URL in the upper right-hand corner there. So when you come to the page, the first thing to point out is that if you scroll to the right, there's actually a substantial amount of information contained about each project. So we collect data on the lead investigators in BC and the investigative team, the lead and other organizations that are involved, the type of research, so whether it's biomedical, clinical, health services, population, public health policy, whether it's patient-oriented project, what type of funding they've received, whether it is specific to BC or part of a larger project, what geographic regions it covers, the study population, and lots of other relevant information. So make sure you do scroll all the way to the right so that you can see all of the bits and pieces that we've been able to collect about each project. At the bottom there, you're able to filter and sort based on each of the fields that are listed in blue. So for example, if you only wanted to take a look at projects that were being conducted across Canada, you can filter and sort by that. You can also change the number of projects that you see. The database is getting quite substantial, so it's easier sometimes if you're only showing a subset of the results. You can search for anything, an individual's name, a keyword. So the search is really robust, so it's really easy to find what you need to find. And lastly, you can export it, all of these into a variety of formats. So if you wanted to download it as an Excel file to do a bit of analysis yourself, you are absolutely able to do that. So as of Monday, Monday morning, we were actually up to 380 distinct research projects. I just checked before the session started this morning, and we were up to 385 of those 385 projects, which over the matter of like a few months is absolutely incredible. Of those, 49% cover population and public health areas, or 185 projects, and 22% or 83 cover health services and policy. 10% or 37 studies here are cross-cutting, meaning that they cover more than one of CIHR's 4 pillars. We also did some analysis of the types of questions that are being asked specifically within the health services and policy and population health areas. So among the health services studies, 39% are looking at healthcare service effects for specific patient populations. 37% have a focus on health workforce, 22% around health system capacity, 28% on responding to non-COVID health needs, and 13% on other or unknown. And of all of these projects, 30 of them, or 36%, identified that they were addressing more than one of these project areas. Similarly, for population and public health, you can see there's a huge spike there in terms of those projects that are looking at effects on specific patient populations. So it's just under 2/3 actually have that as a core focus. 19% are looking at the development of public health measures, 32% in terms of the effects of stay-at-home and physical distancing, 12% on general population health outcomes, and 5% other or unknown. And of all of these projects, 55 or 30% are addressing more than one of these research areas. So in terms of geography, 65% of the projects in our database are specific to BC, and 35% are part of a larger multi-provincial or multinational study. We did some work to look at the geographic distribution within the province. So to be clear, this does not represent the organization that is responsible for the particular research project. Instead, it's looking at the health authority geography within which data are being collected. So you can see there's a massive number in Vancouver Coastal Health. Around 80% of the studies are doing at least some data collection within the Vancouver area. 21% within Fraser, 10% in Interior, 14% in Island, 6% in Northern. And there were 16 studies, or approximately 4%, that are actually doing data collection across the entire province. So in terms of next steps, we are just started this process of being able to build a report that will summarize inventory content. And the emphasis of that report is really going to be on identifying gaps. So what research areas can we see are not being addressed within the large scope of research that's being done? What are the patient populations whose needs are not being addressed by research? What clinical contexts are not being addressed? And we're hopeful that that can be informative in terms of future calls for funding, and just to support researchers to start work in areas that are not currently being addressed. We also have plans to map the research projects according to the newer Strategic Research Advisory Committee priorities, which we're hopeful are going to come out soon. And in hopes that, again, that makes the content of the inventory more useful for our ministry partners. And lastly, and I think probably most importantly, we're expanding to think about how we can link the content of this inventory to the actual results of research. So stay tuned for that. And I'd like to conclude with a plea, which is just that if your project isn't listed here, and if you've had a conversation with your research team and you've checked so you know it's not there, please write us and let us know. This tool really is only useful if it's as complete as possible. And at the moment, we do have to require, or we do have to sort of depend on active participation from researchers to collect that information. There is no comprehensive source that we can draw from. Similarly, if the status of your project has changed, please contact us. So what I mean by that is if you entered a study when you were applying for a CIHR COVID grant and you were unfortunately not successful and now that study is not going forward, please let us know. That's really important so we can make sure that the registry is accurate. And lastly, when you do start to produce results, be open to sharing them with us. When we do find a way of contacting you about that, we're not sure yet exactly what that's going to look like, whether it's going to be a link to publications, reports, or other things, but be open to sharing so that we are able to include that information. My contact details are there and the link to the inventory as well, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Lindsay, and thank you for the team that's put this together. I know that it's being used in a very active way now, and I'm sort of excited at the prospect of us using it for that sort of like synthesis within particular areas to give an in-depth description of the work that is currently happening. It's interesting, like the N of 385. That's 385 research studies that are happening on COVID in BC is remarkable. Like that's a huge success story. It's also like something that we need to learn from around coordination and collaboration, I think. So I think there are two messages that I take from the N being 385 at this point. So just as a reminder, if anyone wants to if a patient or a member of the public, just put patient or public at the beginning of the question, and I'll prioritize that question. So Diane Finegood asks, what are the use cases for the registry, and how do you expect it to be used?
So I think there are two things that spring to mind right away. And the first is in terms of being able to support targeted funding going forward. So if we see that there is a large amount of research in one area, but there's a priority that's been identified by the Strategic Research Advisory Committee, for example, that isn't being covered, then that I think there's impetus there for funding agencies to be putting targeted funding such as RFPs to support research being done in those areas. The other thing I would say is, as somebody who's trying to be actively involved in COVID-related research, taking a look at the inventory to see if something that I'm interested in doing is already being covered by another team, and connecting with that team is another way that I have heard of people using it and that I have used it myself. So those are the two that I would say right off the bat.
Great, thank you very much, Lindsay. And I think, I mean, one of the areas that I think we'll use as a starting point is long-term care. So I think there's a lot of interest in what research is happening in long-term care around COVID at this point in BC, and BCHSN is working in the area of long-term care anyway. So I think we'll certainly have that as an initial area that we'll give some focus to. I just wanted to actually make reference additionally to the work on surveys. So there's also an inventory of COVID surveys, COVID-related surveys that are happening in BC that's on the BCHSN website. That's collated by the ministry and is shared through the BCHSN website. So just out of interest, there are 118 COVID-related surveys happening in BC at the moment, and many of those are collecting data that can be shared. So and used in health research. So just to be aware of that. Larry asks, are registry projects being directed to post on REACH?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's actually a really great idea. Thank you, Larry. I think what we could do is post something on our on the research inventory page. Oh, and Dan's just posted it in the chat there. So I guess when folks go to the URL there, we could include a link also to Reach BC, or put a mention on the inventory about Reach BC.
That would be great. We do have like individual researchers who find Reach BC themselves to post their own registry. Like we have one on emergency department registry that's going to be posted soon. But yeah, to just spread the word.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, and thanks Lindsay, and again thanks very much to everyone who's contributed to supporting the development of this resource that I think is enormously helpful for us as we think about coordination of COVID research moving forward. Good. So let's move on. So our next presenter is Kim McGrail. Kim probably for this community needs no introductions, but I will give her an introduction anyway. So Kim is the Scientific Director of PopData BC and also a professor in the School of Population and Public Health at UBC. And Kim's going to be talking to us about PopData BC and the resources that are, or the support that's available for COVID research through PopData BC. Kim, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just get this shared. And now I have to get it started properly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is obviously a bit of a quick tour of the sorts of things that we're launching. Some of this was in plan anyway and has been sped along by COVID, which I think is a common theme for lots of people. So just to make sure that everybody has same understanding of PopData, we're a provincial resource, actually accessible to anybody in Canada, but we definitely focus on BC. We really want to support research on health services, but also determinants of health more generally, and well-being and development. We have partnerships with multiple data stewards, both in the province and elsewhere, national partners, for example. We are key partners for COVID-19 research, including with the health sector, with Ministry of Health and Health Authorities, but also with the broader government data innovation program, which I'll cover a little bit later. And PopData is essentially the front door for researcher access to these kinds of data. I just want to acknowledge that there's lots of partners that we have, and what we're doing with PopData is we really take this sort of broad strategic view of wanting to make sure that we're offering innovative practice to support researchers, that we're problem solving. So when people want to do things that aren't quite in the realm of the possible right now, we want to help make those things happen. And we really are effectively doing this through partnerships, which I think you can see from the wide variety of various partners and funders we've had. This is really fundamental to the way that we work. And I acknowledge particularly the AHSN and the BC support unit as PopData is a very active and happy partner in that grouping. See, our core kind of functions for PopData are providing data access, conducting data linkage, providing secure data storage and archiving, and we have a whole education and training arm, including a population health data analysis certificate program. Underpinning this, we have been quite active over the last few years in deliberation with the public around data, and particularly around how we best support researchers' desires for more data linkage and more innovative research, but in a way that's respectful of expectations and values of the public. So just very, very briefly on why we think PopData is necessary, and you might have noticed that I framed the title for this talk as creating science infrastructure. And I think that that's a kind of a fundamental piece of what we're trying to do, is to help researchers not feel whenever they want to do a data-based project, a secondary database project, that they're not just spending their time pushing a rock up a hill. That for data stewards, we provide transparency and a service so that that they don't have to use their own resources to do everything involved with supporting data access, although data stewards retain very important roles and responsibilities. And for the public, we want to make sure that there's transparency about what's happening with data that are collected through public means, but also that the public has the greatest benefit from what we can do with data, because to this point, I would say that we leave a lot on the table. We're not using all of the data that are available to us to their greatest effect, which is not a critique of researchers. It's really much more of a comment that there's great things going on and so much more that we could be doing. So the current data resources that we have available for request, I'm not going to read through this in detail. All of this information is on our website. You can go and read about these things. What I really just want to highlight is that they're very broad. So we have healthcare and health services data, a range of data sets that are provided either through the Ministry of Health or health authorities. We also have population vital statistics information on early childhood and education, occupational data, demographics and life course data, including the BC Generations survey project, which includes biological samples, and then a fair bit of ecological data too that describe the context, the social context or the environmental context in which people live. And then there's lots of service developments we're pushing forward. Again, this is very much in partnership with data providers and others. A couple of these on the top are things that we've really been able to accelerate with COVID-19. So one of these is the idea of a core product. And this is effectively a way to have a faster turnaround for data requests as long as if you're a researcher and request a set of fields that are effectively pre-approved by data stewards that they're potentially available for research, that it will mean quicker approval times and a positive effect on costs as well. Just to be clear that the data component is only one requirement for researcher access. You still have to fulfill all the other requirements like ethics review and so on. But this is, I actually think that this is a fundamental step change in the way that we will have data access, and we will expand this beyond COVID-19 projects as soon as we can. Another piece that we've been able to make happen for COVID projects is access to open year data. And what I mean by that is we're not any longer restricted to only providing fiscal year files. So for example, if you were to make a request now for healthcare services data, and one of the files you wanted was PharmaNet with prescription information, we'd probably be able to provide data up at least through July of 2020. So it means that the research we're doing can be far more contemporaneous and responsive to current priorities, which clearly in the context of COVID is really important. We're working on programs of research. So with the intent that these are interconnected projects that would use a similar or the same data resource. So this will be more efficient for researchers and acknowledges that researchers might need data for a longer period of time. And we're always upgrading our secure research environment, which is essentially a private cloud. And we're adding some GPUs in to support machine learning for researchers that wish to go in that direction. I also want to talk about a couple new opportunities that are coming. One I mentioned at the very beginning is this BC Data Innovation Program, which is the partnership with Pop Data and that part of government to make the non-health, well, plus health data available, as well as the health sector data. So this would be things like income and work data, justice, education, early childhood, and social supports. And these data are available for COVID-19 related research. And like I said, this is a really big step forward, and would be happy to provide more details if people need those. The other opportunity is we're part of a pan-Canadian health data research network called Health Data Research Network Canada. And so this network is funded by CIHR through the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research and is aimed at supporting multi-jurisdictional studies. So if you're interested in doing things in BC plus Ontario or BC plus Ontario and Alberta, or whatever configuration you're interested in, there's services there that you can find out what data are available, and we will support the access process. So that's really the main things I wanted to provide. There is both the general information on POP data and the data access process online, and also a specific COVID-19 page, which you can find from any page on our website. So the website is there, and I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you for being perfectly on time. And actually, again, just to say, a huge thank you. I think the work that Kim and Pop Data have done in BC, and then obviously in partnership with Ministry and other organizations to get us into this place is, we're we're a great place to be doing database research in BC, and that's largely because of the work of that Kim's been leading at PopData. So thanks very much for that. A couple of questions have come in. I have to admit that my wife always tells me that I'm not great at multitasking, and I'm having to multitask now. So so I'm trying to keep on top of all of the chat that's happening. There was a question from a patient partner that actually related to surveys, but I think it may be something that you could comment on, Kim. So the question was, if I complete a survey for one study, can my data be used for a different study? And would I be informed about that possibility? I know it's not directly relating to your talk, but I thought you might have a comment on that, Kim.
Yeah, it actually does relate, at least in the context of COVID-19, it relates to some other work that's been going on. For those who aren't aware, the Faculty of Medicine at UBC started a clinical research coordination initiative, which now is very much provincial in nature. And part of that really is a couple things. One is taking very much an open science approach to COVID-related research, understanding that we are blessed in this province to have relatively small number, although unfortunately growing number of people with COVID-19, and we can't overburden them with research. So it's really important to coordinate. And if multiple research projects are interested in similar or the same types of survey questions, then it's really much better to share them rather than to ask people to respond to pretty much the same thing more than one time. So this really depends on how consents are set up in the first place. And we're encouraging people to take a broad consent approach so that it will enable research to different projects to use the same survey data collection. So at least in the context of COVID, I think we're aiming in that direction. And yes, for sure, it would be a responsibility of research teams to inform patients of what studies they've been involved with.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, another question is, it's more of a comment and then a question. It is remarkable that none of the healthcare professional associations are partners of PopData BC. And I hope that yesterday's Learning Health Systems presentation is a shift towards integrating frontline healthcare and health research. You would think that they are inseparable. Comments, question mark.
I mean, certainly I think professional organizations and clinical providers are absolutely involved in the research that's supported by PopData. They have not to this point been directly involved in PopData itself, although I actually think one of the directions that we should be going is getting more into the health human resource work space. So understanding who actually is a provider, and thinking, particularly in COVID-19, I've been thinking about the effects on providers in the healthcare system of being in that frontline situation. So very, very interesting projects to link, for example, nursing registrations or physician registrations, and just to along with the long-term care pieces that Stirling already mentioned. So I agree that it's an interesting future area of development, and Learning Health System is the right frame for that, for sure.
I would agree strongly with that. So thank you very much, Kim. And yeah, thanks again for everything you're doing for placing BC in such a great place to do data-related health research. I'm going to move on. I know that there are other questions. We might come back to some of those questions in the general overview, but I just want to move to Harlan Pruden and give Harlan a fair share of the time to discuss his great work. And I have to say, I've been using it as well, the COVID-19 Inclusive Language Guide. So Harlan is a First Nations Cree. He's First Nations Cree. He works with and for the Two-Spirit community locally, nationally, and internationally. He's an educator at the BC Centre for Disease Control and specifically for the Chi Mamuk program as part of BCCDC. And he's an Indigenous public health, which is the Indigenous public health program. Harlan is also the managing editor of the Two-Spirit Journal, which can be found at twospiritjournal.com. So thank you very much, Harlan, for the work you're doing and for agreeing to share it with us today. So over to you, Harlan.
Thank you so much. Tansay, no chacham Harlan Pruden, waka no mani motor mouth Mabel, niha 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 ayakwe. Greetings, my relatives. I'm here to talk about, well, my government name is Harlan Pruden, but you can also call me Motormouth Mabel because I'm going to be talking very, very fast because I have a lot of information to share with you. What I'm going to be talking about is language is power, or the power of language, and focusing my conversation on the BCCDC COVID-19 language guide, guides for inclusive language. And I'm honored to be here, and I wish to acknowledge that I am a visitor and a guest of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations people. All right, a little bit of background of where did this language come from. So back in February, early February, I was redeployed and appointed to the BCCDC's COVID-19 Communications Working Group for the development of public-facing guidance. And you can see that on our website. And then in early March 2020, the NIAID, Anthony Fauci's organization, released their language guide, and I'm on a national advisory board in the US to help with the recruitment of Indigenous people, but also BIPOC people within clinical trials. And so they shared me an advanced copy, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I was using that guide to help with inclusifying the language around the public-facing documents. And then in late March, thanks to Michael Smith Foundation, Emily Rempel, Katie Fenn, and myself, were awarded as PIs a rapid survey to access of knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors around misinformation, personal protection, and public health measures for COVID-19 in BC. And also, the nasty V word was showing up on our website as one of the categories. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Plus, some of the guidance that was coming around was using words like risk that is potentially stigmatizing, as the NIAID document was showing. So that kind of led me to like, we should come up with our own guide. So a little bit about the survey, because I think the survey really was some of the key impetus for the development of this guide. So the Michael Smith Foundation awarded us a grant, an award to proactively address the infodemic within BC related to COVID-19. The overall sample size was about 3,000, just over 3,000, and it included around 400 Chinese, 150 Indigenous, 140 South Asian and Southeast Asian, and about 837 South Asian British Columbians. There was also questions to address Two-Spirit as well as LGBTQI communities in a culturally safe and sensitive way. And the data was collected way back in April 14th to the 19th. Some of the the questions included demographics, knowledge, communication preference, as well as health and harming coping strategies or behaviors, as well as some measures on stigma and discrimination. I am not going to talk a lot. I'm only going to talk about two pieces of data that helped with the justification for this language guide. Now, when it comes to information, we asked the question of, when it comes to information about COVID, I actively look for information from people and groups, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that Dr. Henry showed really high with a 54% of people actively looking for information from Dr. Henry, which is great. But it shows that about 46% of people were not looking to Dr. Henry. And then there is also of the sample size, about 45% were looking to Justin Trudeau and looking federally for that information. Now, this is where most research stops with an aggregate of the larger data set. But if we take that same sample size and we break it down by race and ethnicity, we see a slightly different picture of that data. So of that 54% of folks that were looking to Dr. Henry, 58% were white, 46% Chinese, 46% 45% South Asian, 47% Southeast Asian, and about only 38% Indigenous. And if we juxtapose that with looking at Justin Trudeau and that sample, is that 45% were white, 39% were Chinese, and you have this huge increase of South Asian, 59%, and another significant increase, Southeast Asian, 55%, and that 38%, Dr. Henry, for Indigenous people, 51, or about 1 in 2 of Indigenous people were looking to Justin Trudeau. And so we're seeing how the message is landing differently across different publics. And then we asked some questions around observed stigma and stigma behavior. And I wish I had more time to unpack this, and I'm sorry that I don't. But we asked a question, I am more aware of my ethnic background due to COVID-19. We saw that only 6% of the white publics, but like almost 40% for Chinese and Southeast Asian, like 38%, and then 18% and 19% for South Asian and Indigenous people, respectfully. And then we asked a question to engage internal stigma is I would find it difficult to tell my friends and family members if I had COVID-19. And we see that 13% of white publics said they would have no problem. But again, the internal stigma of like around 30% for Chinese and South Asian, about 42% for Southeast Asian, and then 15% for Indigenous people. And so I was like, COVID is landing by degree and impact differently around like racial and ethnic categories. And we saw that also for LGBT and Two-Spirit. And so what was our responsibility? And so this came up to the prompting of we must be more sensitive of how we're communicating and talking about COVID. And so using the NIAID document as inspiration, and I was, R&Ding it, Robin duplicating it, we came up with our own language guide. And we know that language is power. And so it starts off with this quote. So the overall purpose is to assist with the message and content development by using positive, acknowledging, and inclusive, rather than potentially stigmatizing language that may provoke fear. These guidelines incorporate on a broad sense an equity lens, but they're also informed by the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act that was passed here, and the first of its kind within the country, the commitment for cultural safety and humility in health services, and it also aligned with our PHSA values, which BCCDC is a part of PHSA. There are some limitations. Terminology and language is only is always in a churn and always changing, and so the guidelines highlight current principles and best practices of June. And I already received some feedback. So it's already, we have to go through that revision process. There was also a commitment to a biannual review in January and July. It is offered only in English, and it also does not address or include specific sections on graphics and or images. This is only text. The guidelines start off with these guiding principles like language matter, practicing the platinum rule as opposed to the golden rule. The platinum rule is treat others as they wish to be treated rather than the golden rule of treating others as you wish to be treated. The attentiveness that language evolves, using people or person first language and choice and cultural humility. And there's 2 pages around guiding principles that we use to inform and the guidelines. So how to use the guidelines? First, we have to consider the intended audience or audiences when developing content and applying examples, the examples that are provided within the guide. Content developers should have an operational understanding and knowledge of the guiding principles and the suggested alternatives for commonly used words, terms, and phrases. The guide does not capture all potentially stigmatizing language. So content developers should work to ensure that their language, be it even in research and research questions, meets or exceeds the spirits of the listed guiding principles. Here is a list of the various topic areas that are included within the current language guide. And here is some samples of the actual examples of some suggested ways in which that language can be changed. So rather, like we've learned from the HIV activists, that using the word infection or positive, and like the word infection carries a stigma, being contagious or a threat or unclean. And so what we want to do is to use value neutral language and use descriptive language. So rather than saying COVID infections or new COVID infections, we say, you know, COVID-19 virus or COVID-19 virus transmission or transmission of virus. And then over there, the word risk on the next page, rather than saying risk, is we can say increase or decrease the likelihood or chances of transmitting COVID-19 virus or getting COVID-19 virus, or like using words like risk factors, we should say chronic conditions, and the list goes on and on. Plus this whole thing around like battle language of fight, battle, attack, we should protect and protection from COVID-19. The nasty V word, here's that V word. I myself being gay, and First Nations, or what I would say is Two-Spirit, I would often be defined as being a vulnerable population. How is it that my ethnicity, and how do I change my ethnicity, and who I sleep with, how do I change that? But yet those are used as monikers and to define me as being vulnerable, where what puts me at vulnerability is systems of oppression, like settler colonization, homophobia, transphobia, racism. And so there is a page that draws into attention from Dr. Amy Katz, is no group or people is inherently vulnerable. If a group or people is experiencing vulnerability in a particular situation, setting, system, or society, that vulnerability is being produced by other people. It is entirely possible to trace how that vulnerability is produced and who is responsible. If vulnerability and vulnerable is used, it warrants a description of how it is produced and who is responsible. And so we must challenge the way our current conversation of public health and research is often used, and that nasty V word.
Well, we're going to have to draw to a close in a minute, if you wouldn't mind.
So
Thanks.
where do I find the guide? Just go to our main page. You can find it by clicking any of those. Scan. Quality improvement, the biannual. So if you have any information, would like to provide any feedback, please do so at that email address. And a big thank you to all of the folks who gave of their time, energy, and spirit and support to make this guide possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harlan, and sorry to interrupt you, but thanks for responding so rapidly. And I'm glad you got the memo on the dress code for the session, so pleased about that. So we've got a few questions, and actually, just to say again, Harlan, this is just fabulous. This is such a great resource for us to have that underpins our ability to really communicate effectively, I think. So thank you for the work you've done. A few questions that have been coming in that I've tried to keep track of. There was a question about Black people and Black communities. You weren't explicitly making reference to Black people in the work that you've done. Do you want to just comment on that?
So within itself is there is that race and ethnicity, and we deferred to CIHRs and how do they collect ethnicity. And so there's specific guidance for questions. And from that guidance, you can develop your race and ethnicity categories using the federal guidance around that. And so it gives like Southeast Asian, oh, you're talking about the actual survey itself.
The survey, yeah.
Yeah, I have to get back to you on that.
Okay. I mean, I think one of the sort of great things that your work sort of shows is the importance of collecting data on race and ethnicity, and actually understanding what we mean by race and ethnicity, and actually maybe challenging some of the categorizations that exist already, so that we end up with more, ones that actually are meaningful to people. So I think that's. I think the importance of data and collecting data on that, rather than shying away from collecting data on race and ethnicity, I think is, for me, like a really important piece. I can actually see someone with a hand up. I don't know if we're actually for our. I don't even know if you're able to speak at this point. If you are, then I'm very happy to take your question. But otherwise, please feel free to add it into the chat.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Great.
Okay,
just quickly, if you could, because we're almost out of time.
Okay, Harlan, thank you so much for doing that. I think it's really important. In global health, we've also found that there's quite a lot of stigma in various communities. I just wanted to ask you about the V word, because often I work in sexual health. We often use that for vagina. So that was very cool to see that there's a lot of V words. But as somebody who does anti-racism work, we often look at vulnerability from a structural perspective, and we find it really important to point out structural and systemic inequities. So vulnerability for me, or marginality, has been a way that we've talked about that. And I just wanted to ask you about your reflections in that area.
Sure.
Just briefly, Harlan, if you could. Thanks.
Sure. So I think that the way in which that you actually used it, of like you're defining it, and you're just not using it. But often when I see the word vulnerable and vulnerable populations, it's not defined. And as Amy Katz showed in their paper is that when it's not defined, and clearly it is posited on the individual, like me, my ethnicity, or me, my sexual orientation, and I'm the problem. And so it is, how do we look at the system and the systems of oppression, and how do we draw that into focus? And that's where we should be looking for the changes, but it also implicates the researchers and the folks that they may be part of the systems of oppressions.
Great, thank you very much, Harlan, and thanks so much. So the chair has not been great in this session, and apologies for that. We're almost out of time. I'm going to have one question that's come from a patient that I do want to just sort of share. So, and I'll ask you just to be very, very brief in response. So the question is, I struggle with how patient-oriented research and patient engagement may have been left behind during the emergency response to COVID-19. So how do we rebuild trust and awareness with patient partners? So I'm just going to ask maybe anyone who wants to give a quick response to that, feel free to do that. Maybe we, if Kim, could you start us off just very briefly in response to that question? Has patient orientation been lost as a result of COVID or not?
It's such a hard question, really. I don't think so. I mean, what I have observed in COVID-related research is that people have been really careful to bring in patients. There's been lots of activity. I think in some sense we'd risk overburdening people, but I think there's been lots of responsiveness. And I think that's spilling out. Like I think it's less and less acceptable and more questioned if you don't have the voice in there. I would underline that a lot of the work I do is more about public involvement, or at least as much about public involvement versus patient involvement, which is, I mean, it could be the same people, but it provides a different perspective, right? So I think we need to be open to all of those things. And to borrow one of your phrases, Stirling, it's the horses for courses. But I actually think, like so many other things, this is maybe as a turning point, and maybe we can get to the point where we just won't go back to thinking that we'll do research without those voices.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm sorry that we've got to cut it at that point, but I just wanted to sort of raise that issue so that we can keep the conversation going around the importance of ensuring that people with lived experience are part of COVID research, as well as part of health research more generally moving forward in BC. And just as a closing comment, I think that COVID has brought some culture shift in BC. You know, I think we're actually moving towards a much more collaborative spirit and a collaborative approach. And the supports that we've heard about today, I think are a reflection of that. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the speakers and to the people who've organized the conference, Peter and Tanya in particular, and Kat, enjoy the rest of the day. I look forward to engaging in further conversations. So I'll hand back to Peter, I think, at this point.
Great, thank you, Stirling. And I'm going to rebut your self-deprecating comment about the quality of chairing of that session. I think you did a great job, so thank you very much. And thanks to all the speakers.